From Next 11 to BRICS, China and Russia's trade relationship with the U.S. is competitive. Daniel Ikenson is the Director of Trade Policy Division at the Cato Institute, gives us his insights of the relationships.
The bill just passed the Senate. It passed the Congress last month. It's awaiting the President's signature. The Magnitsky bill was considered in conjunction with what is known as permanent normal trade relations for Russia. There had been controversy as to whether or not the United States would grant that status to Russia and have a normal trade relationship with it. And some members of Congress wanted to tie human rights to this grant of normal trade relations. Sergei Magnitsky was a lawyer who uncovered some corruption in the Russian government, was jailed and held without charges, and died almost a year after he had been jailed. So the bill was named after him. And there's actually not a separate bill named the Magnitsky Bill anymore. The language from the Magnitsky Bill was inserted into the Permanent Normal Trade Relations Bill. And what that does is it creates a list of all Russian officials who are presumed to have had anything to do with Magnitsky's arrest, his torture, his death, or the scandal that he uncovered. And those officials will have their U.S. assets frozen, and they'll be denied visas if they want to travel to the United States.
Before we get to the possible retaliation, are you saying that this normal trade relations bill and the human rights situation are two separate issues that the politicians have put together? Because I think there's a little confusion there. What's the relationship between the two?
There is. I mean, I think it's more of a political overture to human rights activists in the United States who have wanted to not pursue normal trade relations with Russia. By including this language, I think it lets some U.S. lawmakers off the hook. They're doing something about human rights, but quite frankly, there are human rights abuses all around the world, and I don't see this as helping to promote trade between the United States and Russia. I think it will add conflict to the relationship, and in fact, Russia is considering retaliating. They don't really have recourse legally to retaliate, but they are now claiming that U.S. meat exports, beef exports to Russia, use a particular hormone which is not good for public consumption, and on those grounds they're considering banning U.S. beef.
The deficit issue between the United States and China with respect to trade. There's been a lot of talk in trying to reduce that deficit over the past couple of years, but as you look at the numbers, it seems almost implausible that any change of the trend, at least, would be meaningful at this point. But what is the current stance of that deficit, and what's likely to move that needle over the next couple of years?
The U.S. bilateral trade deficit with China is approaching $300 billion. The overall trade relationship is a little over $400 billion. I think entirely too much is made of it. You know, we live in a globalized economy. When we import products from China, chances are a lot of the value of those imports come from other countries. So, for example, you've probably heard about the iPod and the iPhone study. The iPod, for example, costs $150 to produce, and it's produced of components made in Japan, Korea, the United States, Singapore. It's assembled in China. $6 of that $150 cost of production is Chinese, but the entire $150 registers as an import from China, adding to this politically volatile bilateral trade deficit. There is a movement afoot to sort of disaggregate the value of trade so that we don't have these political firestorms. Really, there's no meaning. Because of global supply chains, it doesn't matter that the U.S. has a bilateral deficit with any country. There's more talk about the overall trade deficit, and there's concern because it's rising. But the fact is, the trade deficit in the United States is correlated with job growth in the U.S. and economic growth in the U.S. We import more as we're growing. Our trade deficit tends to rise when we're growing, and it goes in the other direction when we're contracting.